acknowledging they are forward-leaning about it.
The options are essentially stop providing services or do it for free.
The economy is a system that was designed. We can redesign it to get the outcomes we want to see.
Actually, this wasn't inevitable. You had a choice about what you gave your money to, and you chose to keep your promise to landlord.
It is quite devastating to see this current government absolutely trash what has been a really good track record with disability.
The complete lack of investment into Te Ao Māori.
What is the top priority for that $15 billion? The government says the top priority for that $15 billion is tax cuts.
But it's not fair that a religious group like Destiny Church stands outside a school. If it was any other protest group, parents would not accept that.
Hello there, kia ora. Unfortunately, you might be able to tell if you haven't seen the chat already, I am here by myself tonight. Blake sends his apologies, he's not feeling particularly well, but we do have a bit of an update around his plan to try and get Louise Upston on the show, which I'll get to in just a second. Also need to pass on apologies from Te Pāti Māori MP Takuta Ferris. There was a little bit of an issue with scheduling that happened around the time we were due to record today, so he's going to be joining us next week. So if you're watching this on the YouTube page, you can jump over to the community section, leave a question for him in there if you've got anything that you're really keen to hear about. I'm really curious to hear from him about yesterday's announcements around the hospital, because he's the MP who represents the entire South Island when it comes to the largest electorate in the country. So when you hear people getting upset that maybe the government is playing the people of Dunedin off the people of Nelson, both of those are in his electorate. So I'm really keen to get his perspective on that. But of course, if you've got questions, please go and drop them in the comments section. Also, if you're a paid up member on YouTube, you can now access tonight's interviews. They're all available there, and they'll be available to everybody else during the day tomorrow in both video and podcast version if you want to have a listen to those. So let's jump straight into the first thing that we've got to deal with. As you might be aware of, Blake has been really keen to try and get Louise Upston on the show, the Minister for Disability Issues. And we all know exactly how well that this government deals with media requests. And we are officially media. It was in the news this week where what they called a podcast, which I might get put up on like one of those really fancy little prestige movie poster things, just, Paul the other one, and the BFG podcast, a podcast with the little laurels around the side. Could be kind of fun. So this actually came in today for Blake. It is a letter from Louise Upston, which I'll read out to you now. It says, "Dear Blake, thank you for your email of 29 August 2024 regarding the recently announced changes to the Disability Support Services, or DSS. I understand you have concerns around what these changes will mean for the disability community. I want to assure you the government is committed to the Enabling Good Lives, EGL, vision and principles. I want the best outcomes for the disabled community and their families and those who care for them, and the government is focused on maximising this support. I want to make it clear that there have been no funding cuts. Disabled people will get the support that they need. The Coalition Government is aware of how vital disability services are. Budget 2024 allocated additional funding of $1.1 billion over 5 years to the Ministry of Disabled People, Whaikaha, for critical services that support disabled people, families and carers. I know that urgent action is needed to stabilise the system and ensure disabled people and carers have certainty around what they can access. The changes I have announced are about improving disability supports and knowing that we have a system that is fair for all who get support and that people can feel confident about. I hear your request for consultation. I will be taking advice from officials on options for a consultation and engagement strategy with the disability community and DSS stakeholders as we work through building the consistency needed in a national service. I have asked that the consultation includes opportunities for disabled people, tangata whaikaha Māori, their families, whānau, and carers to provide input. Thank you for taking the time to write to me. I hope my response provides you some assurance that this coalition government is determined to build fair, sustainable, high-quality disability support systems that deliver better outcomes for disabled people based on their needs. If you'd like to pass me details about your podcast, while I might not be able to appear on it, I would like to give it a listen, which I think is a brilliant absolutely brilliant thing to have on there about her wanting to listen. Now, Blake has actually given me a statement as well that he wanted me to read out tonight. It says here, I am delighted to have heard from the Minister today. This is a really positive step in our journey towards advocating for the disabled community. I hope she will fulfill her promise once we sent her some samples of the podcast. We endeavour to have the remaining disability issues representatives from the other bodies and political parties on the show in the coming weeks, in which I hope to be well enough to return for. So that is the update that we've got for you. Louise might not be on the show, but at least she's paying attention to some of the voices within the disability community, or saying that she's willing to listen to some of the voices in the disability community, which is definitely something that we want any government ministers to deal with and to listen and to pay attention to. That was a fun way to start. Right, first thing we're going to do tonight is actually sit down and have a little chat to Gordy Lockhart. Now, you might not know Gordy by name, but this last couple of weeks has been pretty big for him. He's been involved in a campaign for years to get a rainbow crossing in Tauranga, and he's been the driving force behind it. He's attempted it 4 times over the last decade, and each time he seems to get knocked back, except for the most recent time when they've finally turned around and said, yes, we will do that. This is a really fascinating insight into the plan that he had to try and get people out there talking about this particular piece of Pride artwork and getting the community to feel safe, because that's a big element as to why he felt it was necessary. It came on the back of a report that came out this week from Stats NZ around the wellness of the country. I actually mentioned it in one of the videos earlier this week. I think it was yesterday's video, around social cohesion and how we measure that. But there's a huge amount of data in that around the things that make us feel safe and how well balanced we feel as a country. And people in the rainbow community, particularly young people in the rainbow community, they were marked lower on the well-being stats than we saw for people not in the rainbow community. And that's one of the reasons why Gordy felt that something like a symbol of a rainbow crossing in the middle of Tauranga could be just a little step to try and make sure people feel accepted and welcome everywhere. But being Tauranga, there were a few people out there that were a little bit old-fashioned and conservative. So we'll jump into that one. We'll get the interview from Gordy up and running. It is a pre-record, and Blake is in this one, so he's not completely devoid from the show. Let's check it out. Hey everybody, welcome to the show. We've got Gordy Lockhart here, diversity and inclusion advocate from Tauranga. First of all, Gordy, congratulations on getting the rainbow crossing put in or authorised. Is it at the final step now where it's all finished and done and signed off, or is it like one more level of council to go through?
No. I think it's. Essentially, the instruction from council, or the idea from the transport team of council was that, assuming the council approved it, which they did, it would be installed pre-Christmas, which is wonderful. So yeah, I mean, no date as yet. I have suggested that perhaps it would be a good idea to hurry up that process, but no date as yet.
Brilliant. Blake, I'll let you jump in before I take everything over again.
Yeah, this has been an avocation for you for several years, as I understand. So how hard has it been? Because obviously there's been lots of highs and lots of lows. Have you found the process difficult, taxing? How's it been feeling for you?
Yeah, bloody good question. I mean, it's one of those things that's been, I guess, a project, main project, a side project, and has various sort of levels of sort of, workload attached to it for 6 years. Along with a number of other people, I kind of co-founded Tauranga Moana Pride back in 2018. And as part of that, we discussed the idea of having a rainbow crossing for the Pride Week. And to be fair, this was prior to the change to NZTA regulations that allowed the installation of street art, any form of street art. But at that point in time, Tauranga City Council said no, because it didn't reflect the NZTA regulations on pedestrian crossings. And the next year, 2019, we tried the same thing. The funny story with that one was that the week we got the rejection the second time was the same week that Wellington City Council painted the threshold of the Wellington City Airport in rainbow colours. And Tauranga City Council's view was that a rainbow crossing in Tauranga would distract drivers, which was odd, given that it didn't distract the view of airline pilots travelling at several hundred kilometres an hour with hundreds of people on board. But then perhaps they hadn't considered Tauranga drivers in that discussion. Yeah. So, yeah, sorry, Blake, carry on.
No, you carry on, sorry.
No, it's all right. So, yes, I mean, ultimately, we got to 2022 when there was a whole bunch of stuff happening in Tauranga around some religious discrimination within the religious schooling environment. And that led to the third request for a rainbow crossing, which was denied again, which was slightly concerning because that was then after the change in legislation. So that seemed to perhaps, that refusal seemed to perhaps based on something other than necessarily the legislative process. But then in earlier this year, following the Gisborne and Auckland hate crimes that were the attacks on the rainbow crossings in those environments, I started a petition to Tauranga City Council to ask for the fourth time. And that went very well. That was interesting. And I guess, before I come to your point around the challenges, Blake, the conclusion to that was the commissioners, the last meeting of the Tauranga City Council commissioners in May, forwarded it on to the first meeting of the new councillors, the new elected councillors there in September. And, thank goodness they passed the motion, which was marvellous. But your point around... I guess challenges is a good one, Blake. And the biggest challenge was not in the process of requesting a rainbow crossing. The biggest challenge was the online hate. And I guess you guys are probably know exactly what that's about. And, that sort of stuff is appalling, full stop. There is no rhyme or reason why any online hate would be acceptable. But in the last 2 years, I've had 4 death threats. The stuff around the rainbow crossing was simply appalling. The connection between the LGBT community and paedophilia is mentioned several times. Some of the conspiracy theories that come out were incredible. I didn't even know this when I had to check this one up. Apparently, there's the pink and white colours in the rainbow flag, which anybody who's in an educated sense would understand that's for the trans community. Apparently that's for the MAP community. And exactly, Paul, your face says it all. I didn't know what that was, so I had to Google it. Apparently, that's the minor attracted persons colours. So, you think, what? And so, but then Googling that all comes from conspiracy theories out of the United States, some far-right lunatics that in that environment and so on. So that's been the biggest challenge, has been dealing with the very small minority of people who are prepared to hate. But the level of that hate is quite scary.
That brings me to my next question. So you talked about it being passed recently. So how much support did you have before it was passed from the subsequent commissioners and the Mr. Drysdale and the new council?
Yeah, good question. Well, the previous commissioners, I think, were slightly in a challenging position throughout their tenure in Tauranga. They were very aware that they were unelected. They were there as change makers. And I think in many cases, they did very well. They did, what I would describe as the ones and the zeros, the infrastructure elements. They did that very well. They got huge changes through in terms of the dearth of the infrastructure requirement in Tauranga. And they did that very well. I worry, and I still worry, that Tauranga City Council misses out on the human a lot. Their attention on community development is lacking, and hopefully that will change over the course of this new council. But what was interesting with the new councillors was that even though that they themselves are perhaps not representative, they're not that diverse a group of people, they're all very progressive, it would seem, which is marvellous. Even those who perhaps hold some more conservative views do seem to be looking to the future. Which is great, and I think ultimately the committee who passed the Rainbow Crossing was just a committee of the full council, and there was 5 councillors on that, but the crossing passed 4-1, which I hope in itself is a major view of the shift in Tauranga diplomacy and democratic process.
I was going to say that the election earlier this year was a really interesting one to watch from the outside, because when I got inside, they yelled and screamed at me because he'd say things about some of their they're very vocal candidates about how incredibly anti-rainbow they were. Did that stir up a lot of issues in terms of the campaign for you, in terms of your particular campaign?
No, I mean, I guess during the election campaign, I mean, you may be aware that there was a system whereby you could sort of, as a member of the public, as a member of the electorate, you could sort of submit questions for the candidates to answer during some of the various debates. And I was sort of, heaping questions into that system based around wider diversity in general, not specifically necessarily the LGBT community. But I think it was interesting and it was telling in terms of a demographic. So there was one question that I asked about, how did the candidates feel Tauranga was progressing from the point of view of diversity and inclusion? And that question was asked at one of the debates in the Tariko ward. And what was really interesting was there was 4 candidates. Only 2 of them chose to answer the question live, standing up and answering the question. One of them said that he thought Tauranga was leading the field, quote, in diversity and inclusion because he knew a Filipino guy that was going to vote and therefore he was having his say.
I remember that. Oh my God, yes. Yeah.
Yeah. And then another guy stood up and said that he thought Tauranga was also leading the field in diversity because we have foreign food trucks at events. But I guess what's frightening about those kind of points is that view is clearly a view of a certain demographic in Tauranga. And while that will change in time, it's pretty horrifying that is the case.
Yeah. Oh my God. To be fair, we did have Filipino food trucks here last weekend, which is delicious. But I don't think that's really a sign of diversity within a community when it's one Filipino.
No, exactly.
Yeah.
And I think, my point around the Rainbow Crossing in this context, and certainly around, what's been happening in Tauranga since the anti-LGBT violence of 21-22, is that the biggest threat we face as a community is not from those small percentage of haters. It's from the wider percentage of society who doesn't get involved. It's that idea, if you see somebody getting beaten up on a bus, what do? Are you going to, as a community, are you going to say that's not acceptable? Or are you going to run away? And I think the worry that we have in so many senses is we run away these days rather than get involved. And back in 2022, when there was the Rainbow Youth Building was burnt to the ground in an arson attack, my view was that the Tauranga society should be getting together to say that's not acceptable. And, in many cases, the problem we have is that wider society just doesn't really care. It's not that they are not sympathetic. It's not that they don't support the LGBT community. It's that simply it doesn't impact, they believe, their daily lives, and therefore they don't necessarily see the prejudice, or they're not necessarily prepared to get involved in aiding the prejudice. And that's one of the problems we have in society right now, is that we don't have this collective view of societal responsibility.
Actually raises a really interesting point about, it's all good. There was some research that came out this week. I don't know if you've had a chance to see it. It's Stat NZ's wellness survey. They do this every couple of years. One of the things I found really interesting in this year's survey is that they've got a really specific LGBTQ measure in place, and they compare that to the general population. And in terms of self-esteem, feeling safe, feeling comfortable in their own skin, particularly for young people in the rainbow community, those were far lower than you found in the general population. For me, that's why something like a rainbow crossing is a really important visible sign that there is support out there for people. I'm kind of wondering what your perspective is on those sort of findings, but also the importance of that visibility within the community.
Absolutely. I mean, I think instance I held recently, I have a little tourism business in Pilot Bay, and during Pride Week earlier this year, I flew the Pride flags at my business. And that was great. It looked fabulous in Pilot Bay in Mount Maunganui, and it looked superb in the sunshine. The number of same-sex couples who came along because they felt valued was great. A couple of stupid comments made by some, but we'll move on quickly from that. But this one particular day, I remember I sort of was quite quiet. There was some bikes out, but I was quite quiet. And I sort of looked to my right and spotted there was a couple walking along the beach, 2 blokes, couple walking along the beach holding hands. And I thought, that's really cool. That's fabulous if they felt comfortable enough to do that in that environment. So they saw the flags, they stopped, we had a chat. And I said, look, I'm just so pleased that you guys, feel comfortable to hold hands walking along the boardwalk. And their point at the time was, they said, yeah, we'll do it here in Mount Maunganui, but we wouldn't do it in Tauranga. And it was really interesting that these guys who were Gen Zs, they were sort of early 20s, had that view. They were making that distinction that one environment was okay to do it, whereas one other environment potentially held some physical threat towards them. And it was horrifying. And when I talk about general society not understanding prejudice, that's what I'm talking about. People don't consider that simply walking down the street with your partner of choice, hand in hand, could lead to physical violence. I don't think there is any other community in New Zealand that has that potential threat attached to their daily existence. So you're absolutely correct. A symbol of diversity, a symbol of acceptance of a community is great from two perspectives. First of all, it highlights that concept of we are not a binary concept, human beings. We are many, many different diversities. But most importantly, it says to those rainbow kids that it's okay, you be you.
What I would ask is, when you, as part of your agreement with the council, because we have seen so much vandalism, unfortunately, over the last couple of years, is there provision in place to ensure that it kept up to standard should the anti-groups return?
Yeah, I mean, a good point, Blake. And it's just the idea that you even have to consider that is horrifying, isn't it? I mean, that's just absolutely crazy. But yeah, you're right. I mean, the point was made at the council meeting that the council had to consider that there would be a cost for repainting regularly. As much as it's horrifying that's the case, they very much skewed it along the lines of the rainbow crossing or the rainbow street art being road marking, and thus road marking does need maintenance and it does need maintained. But slightly ironic when the online haters would use their dog whistle argument of the cost of install. And then, of course, those individuals may be the ones who would be responsible for the vandalism that would require additional cost and so on and so on. So there is always that risk. And I guess it's down to the community being prepared to ensure that there is appropriate views on cameras of the crossing and that people are caught and charged with hate crimes, as they were in Auckland. Because it needs to be made clear that sort of behaviour is nothing short of unacceptable.
Anything else from you, Paul?
Well, I'm kind of curious as to what the next step is for you. You've been working on this for years now, and it's signed off. You've got the unveiling of it coming up at some point in time. Can I recommend the 14th of December? I'll be in Tauranga then visiting my best friend and his husband, so I'm very much hoping that it'll be up and available then. Have to climb the mount, though, and that part I'm not looking forward to. I'm not a fit person. It's not good. But for you, what's next after you spent years on this campaign? You've got this end line in sight now. What else can be done in the community to help grow that acceptance with people? And what are you planning on doing next?
Well, my view is that, obviously, my focus as a person, my passion as a person is that idea that, we're here to leave a better tomorrow for those who follow, right? And I think that has various parts of it. For me, my main passion is obviously pride advocacy. But back in 2022, I started a charity called UBU Aotearoa. And the whole point is exactly that, you be you. And that does not matter whether you being you means that you are a Chilean Catholic single parent trans person. You be you, Similarly, if you are from Tauranga and you have a religious belief, fine, great, you be you. The defining line, the line in the sand in that respect, though, is that in my celebrating you being you, you have to celebrate me being me. And that is what a successful society does, right? So UBU is all about whole society diversity and the idea that in New Zealand today we are represented by 200 ethnicities, a huge number more what we describe as social identities, which is the mix of diversities within individuals. And that's what's important, is that if we can get to a point where as human beings we celebrate all that we are for who we are, then we'll be a much, much better world. And I guess, to nut that down to some specifics, I looked recently at the Tauranga City Council inclusive cities strategy. And they have a headline that articulates what their concept is around an inclusive city. And I guess it's interesting in the sense that it talks about all ages and beliefs being the most two crucial points. And what's interesting is, of course, if you look at it from a diversity inclusion point of view, age shouldn't be an issue. Age is a discriminatory factor, not a celebratory factor. And belief is a choice issue, not a non-choice issue. And therefore, have a belief, sure, I'll celebrate you having a belief. But in terms of a priority around diversity, non-choice issues such as culture, diversity, gender expression, orientation, etc., have a way higher priority than a belief system. So there are some challenges we have in Tauranga, certainly, and I suspect probably wider New Zealand, around that understanding of what is diversity, what is inclusion, and what are appropriate levels of celebration of that. So UBU is where it's at, and check out the website, ubu.org.nz. We have some cool events on at the moment. We have a speaker series in Tauranga of three events, of which we've had the first. The second is on the 16th of October, where we have Helen Jacoby, who you maybe know was the first lesbian vicar in St Matthews in the City in Auckland, talking. We have Maritha Smith, who's the CE of Diversity Works. We have Michael Burnett, the former CEO of Auckland Chamber of Commerce. We have Jan Tinetti, MP, List MP for Tauranga Moana, and Buddy Mackay, a local historian, Kaumātua, and former Treaty Waitangi director. So those guys coming to town to talk about diversity and what it means and why we need to look at how our society moving forward can be advantaged by a diverse and equitable and inclusive space. So that's all very exciting.
Yeah.
Very exciting.
We'll put some detail down below so that people can learn more about it and hop along, I guess.
Yeah, that would be brilliant. Absolutely. If you guys wouldn't mind, popping the link in the description below, etc., that would be fantastic.
Definitely. I think that's us done. Gordy, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for your hard work. I know it's been a long slog. I've seen some of the comments that you get, and I am really, really impressed that you've managed to tackle them with such resilience and grace and charm. So it's very impressive that you got this far. Well done.
Thank you, Fano. Much appreciated.
I was going to put the link in the chat, and I see already that Kiwi Skirt beat me to it, because Kiwi Skirt is amazing. Absolutely amazing. That full interview, if you missed it, is now available for members on the Paul the Other One YouTube page as well, and available to everybody from tomorrow, and I'll link it on Facebook and stuff like that. I'm going to answer some questions as well that have come through, like this one that came through from It's in the Ballot, who wanted to know who it was that actually voted against it. It was the councillor Steve Morris. Steve is actually the one councillor who was returned from the previous council that got kicked out before the commissioners were brought in. He voted against it because he thought that Tauranga needed a symbol of inclusion, and the rainbow pride flag is not that, apparently. So he voted against it, but everybody else voted for it. The new council seems to be a little bit more progressive than the old one, which obviously upset an awful lot of people. For this comment from Jeremy about the 14th, that's actually one of the reasons why we're going to be in Tauranga then. My best friend's birthday is also the 14th of December, so it made perfect sense to be down there at the same time. I've got a late fee from KiwiBird. Don't have to do that, but I do appreciate it. And a late fee as well from Proletariat. I'm going to have to thank Pat and Chewy for what they do. That seems to have got that habit going for a whole bunch of people. It's very, very cool. So next up, we're going to sit down and have a chat with Kieran McAnulty. Now, should probably point out, we recorded this one on Wednesday, so there is mention of a public meeting that night. That was Wednesday, I think. So it's a little bit out of date. But if you are somebody who is in the Tararua region and you want to get involved in what's happening with the toll road and go to these public meetings, there's a whole bunch of more public meetings coming up all over the region. So you just do a hunt for, I think it's Toll-Free Tararua on Facebook. You'll be able to find a whole bunch of information there about upcoming public meetings and ways that you can get involved with it. So there's plenty there to do. So let's jump in, have a quick look at what Keiran's up to, and go from there.
In the studio, we've got Labour spokesperson for Housing, Regional Development and Local Government, Kieran McAnulty. Welcome to the show, Keiran.
It's a
Thank you, Blake. How's it going?
Doing fine. Hey, what do you start us off? What are your opinions on the government's announcement a few weeks ago that they were going to strip back the councils to nice to have?
Well, I think it's a load of rubbish. The fact of the matter is that this government has made some decisions that have tied one hand behind councils' backs. They scrapped the affordable water reform, which almost immediately meant that rates had to go up. And there was also a piece of work done by the Labor government called the Review into the Future of Local Government, which made some recommendations.
That was an amazing document.
It really was. And it was recognition of the fact that local government is no longer fit for purpose and there needs to be some changes. And at core to that is that the rating system is unsustainable and councils only have one option to do the things that are expected of them by their communities, and that's to put rates up. But the review was to look at alternatives so that the pressure wasn't on households. And this government scrapped it in its entirety. So councils only have one option, and that's to put rates up. And then after doing those two things and looking at withdrawing the funding or restricting the funding that government does give local government, they then have the gall to turn around and blame local councils for the situation that they're in. And I thought it was disingenuous and it was cynical.
One of the things that came through in that particular report as well, and it actually came up on this show last week when we were talking to Tori Whānau and Angela O'Leary from Wellington and Hamilton sittings, they're really concerned about some of the actions that happen within their councils, that there's no real accountability measures in place at the moment. And that was one of the things that came through in the report, was to set up like an independent ombudsman to run basically any kind of accountability issues that pop up across all councils and give you a uniform understanding of rules for councils to go into. Have you come across many issues with local councils who want something like that and kind of feel like they've been left out of the loop by the decision to dump this particular sort of suggested reform?
Yes, when I became Minister for Local Government, the review was not far from reporting back. And when it did report back, I said to LGNZ, Local Government New Zealand, they've got a real opportunity here to identify which of the recommendations they support. I wasn't interested in exploring another divisive reform. We just got our head around the changes that needed to be made in water reform and landed that in a place where we had the majority of support for councils. But it's fair to say that it was quite a rocky road up to that point, and I wasn't interested in going down that path again. So LGNZ went away and consulted with councils, and I've made them a promise that if they could come back and demonstrate broad support for those recommendations, or at least demonstrate which recommendations had broad support, then I would take it to Cabinet. Then there was an election and obviously a change of government. And so that report that they provided the new minister was completely dismissed. And I've been told that there were some recommendations that got as high as 85% support across councils, which is actually a phenomenal achievement and credit to LGNZ, the way they conducted things, because you've got all councils the size of Auckland right down to councils with only a handful of ratepayers. And they all have, whilst they might face the same challenges, they've all got their own perspective. They've all got their unique issues. And to get them all to give that level of support demonstrates a high level of working together and coordination, collaboration, etc. So that was a real chance. And so I do think there is a real appetite amongst the local government sector for some changes. I think it's fair to say that if we were asked today to design local government structure for New Zealand, we probably wouldn't come up with the one that we've got. And so we don't want a situation where government dictates the local government, but you want to make sure the system is set up so that it's easy for communities to make the decisions that are right for them.
Have you had much feedback actually from those communities around the Māori ward referendum? And I'm sure it's a heavily loaded question of what would Labour do when they get in at the next election around the Māori ward referendum?
Yeah, well, we strongly opposed what the government did. It is quite clearly, to any objective observer, an action that was motivated by race and race alone. The calls from the government, the pleas for local democracy and localism and all those sorts of things, utter hypocrisy when they then turned around and imposed their view on councils that had already made their mind up. And it's quite telling that only 2 of the councils that had put Māori wards in decided to scrap them as a result of this government decision. The rest of them have held firm and said, no, we made this decision because we've already consulted with our community and we believe that it's best for us to have Māori wards. And so that in itself is a clear showing that the government got this wrong. And even then, councils were put in an impossible situation because they had to weigh up the cost to their ratepayers of holding a referendum. And no doubt that would have played a part in those 2 councils that voted no, because in voting yes, they are basically voting to spend money on a referendum. So it wasn't a straightforward decision for them. But, as I say, the vast majority voted to keep them. There's a really important piece of information here is that all we did when we brought in this change was make the process for setting up a Māori ward exactly the same as any other ward, as it should be. Why should setting up a Māori ward be more difficult than other wards? There's no justification for that. But a crucial part of this is that it was not compulsory. If a local council decided they did not want a Māori ward, that was fine by us because that's their decision made after consulting their community. And so they spelled it out that the government has made it look like this was forced on councils. It absolutely was not. Some councils chose not to have them. Some councils chose to have them, just like some councils choose to have rural wards and some councils don't. That's exactly how it should play out.
Before we move on to housing, I just want to say that one of the reasons we first were interested to get you on is you made one of our production tweets go viral a while ago by representing it in the House. So we want to say thank you for that, Mr.
Oh yeah, you read out one of my tweets from my local MP Dan.
Yes. Well, I just couldn't believe it, and I thought it was, summed up so well that the government's solution to the housing crisis, and they had no examples, and that's perfect. It's the one glimpse of honesty from this government we've seen. Quite clearly, it was a typo, but they couldn't have filled in the gaps even if they didn't make that typo, because everything they've done in housing is going to make things worse. They came in, let's not forget, they came in on an election promise that they would build more houses than the Labor government. And that is a massive promise to make when you consider that throughout the 6 years that we were in government, there was the highest number of state houses built, or social houses built, since the 1950s, about 14,000 and counting. There was record level of consents being issued, record build activity. For the first time in a long time, the number of first home buyers entering the market was increasing, and we had the highest number of apprentices trained in decades. And now, since the changes that we've made, the government's made, you've seen Kāinga Ora stop building houses, the funding going to social housing providers scrapped to the point where they're only going to be funded for $750 a year from next year, when Kāinga Ora alone built 5,000 last year, and they only paid for that by scrapping the first home grant, which helped around 10,000, at least 10,000 people a year into a home, into their first home. It's just going to go backwards. And I haven't even touched on emergency housing. They're sitting there crowing about the number of people in emergency housing dropping. Well, of course they have, because they're not letting people in. So it's so cynical. But the sad thing is that people are going to suffer as a result of these policies.
We've had a question come in from a viewer that I'll read out to you because it covers this topic as well. Mike wanted to know, do you feel that Bishop actually has an understanding of his role as housing minister?
Look, when Chris Bishop says that he wants to see houses being built, I do believe him. But he should be upfront with the country and say that he has a fundamental belief that it's not the state's job to build social houses, that he believes that the free market will deliver. And on that, we fundamentally disagree, because we've tried this before so many times in this country and it doesn't work. The 9 years of the key national government, the number of social houses in this country went backwards by 1,500. The free market does not deliver when it comes to social houses. And community housing providers, which is the government's provider of choice, will build houses if the government funds them. And because of the choices that this government has made, they don't have money to fund them. And so they've decided to give landlords a $2.9 billion tax cut, and which will see competition increase on existing houses rather than investment going into new houses. That was the settings that we had, and it was working. And they've stripped $1.5 billion out of the housing budget. So I do believe him that he wants to see houses being built, but it's a simple example of saying one thing and then bringing in policies that will do the exact opposite.
Some of that money for emergency housing was taken away and used to write that report, wasn't it? The Bill English report on.
There was money taken out of transitional housing, specifically for youth, which madness. But there was quite a telling moment at question time yesterday where they were crying about the fact that the numbers have reduced in emergency housing, and there were 2 points that I thought were quite telling. One, they said that the families have moved from emergency housing into social housing, which is great, but because this government has significantly reduced the funding going into new social houses, sooner or later there'll be nowhere for these people to go, because this government didn't pay for a single one of those houses. And second of all, one of the follow-up questions was, how much has the government saved by doing this? And I thought, there it is. There's the motivation. The motivation isn't to get people into homes. The motivation is to reduce the cost, the financial burden that emergency housing has on the government. You've got to look at it a different way. It's the cost of homelessness, because people wouldn't need emergency housing if there were enough homes. And the cost of homelessness goes far beyond the cost to the state on emergency housing. It's a massive contributor to poverty, to poor health outcomes, and to crime. And if you can address those through providing people a stable home, and it reduces poverty, and it reduces the demand on the health system, and it reduces the crime rate, isn't that a better way to save the government money? I would have thought so.
You'd think so. But that just sounds logical. You can't use logic with this government.
No, you absolutely cannot.
And it's disturbing when we've got plots sitting empty that are perfectly usable.
Absolutely right. That would have been built on if the Labor Party was still in government. And a crucial stat that I don't think is well known, 70% of Kainga Ora residents have a disability. And Kainga Ora has been criticised by right-wing parties like the National Party, ACT, New Zealand First, for the cost of building houses. One, when you consider the number of houses that are built, I would strongly push back on that. When you consider that 70% of Kainga Ora tenants have a disability, and that quite often requires a particular type of house in order to be accessible, that's going to come at a cost. Now, will the free market deliver homes that are suitable for disabled people? They haven't in the past. and I don't believe they will in the future. So,
and as part of my advocacy, I that's what I hear from my friends. Like, I'm lucky enough to have a wheelchair accessible house, but I've got so many friends that are struggling to find houses now that they have to do a bit of Kiwi ingenuity and build on houses that are not suitable for wheelchairs.
mhm.
And
Of course,
it shouldn't be.
we know that. Sorry, Blake, I interrupted
It
you there.
shouldn't be like that. Is all I was gonna say.
Yeah, it absolutely shouldn't be like that. Now, I do know that there's a strong call from the disability sector for 100% of social houses to be accessible houses. And I do believe that there needs to be a really high proportion of the houses that are accessible. The more dense you go with social houses, the more difficult it is to have 100% accessibility. Once you start to go above 2 or 3 levels, then it does create some issues. However, we are committed to ensuring that particularly units that are on ground level are able to be made available to those with a disability. It's not just wide door frames and ramps. It can sometimes go right down to fine details, like making sure that door handles aren't circular, but rather a long handle so that people can grip it and turn it, and those sorts of things. Things that perhaps the general public might not think about because they don't have to, and that's fair enough. But a government should think about it, because ultimately we believe in the Labor Party that it's a core responsibility of government to ensure that its people are housed. This is a firm belief of our party since the 1930s. Last week was the anniversary of the first state home back in 1937. And it's been a proud but fraught process since then, where we've had different governments placing different priority on housing people. Labor's gone up, National it's gone down, back and forth. And I just despair at that, because so often you hear people saying, why can't you just work together? Well, on something so important like housing, if you can't get agreement on it, that makes it so hard.
And also, touching on disability as well, we've seen in recent days that some of the councils are not very happy that they're going to have to impose a higher parking fine for people that are not suitable for the parking in the park. They claim that it's too high. They claim that they're going to have disgruntled residents. But my argument is, and I don't know, I'm sure you agree, that if they park in the wrong park, they should pay the fine.
Yeah, well, there's two things here. There's we've announced a policy that the government shouldn't require additional things of councils without financial recognition of the cost to councils. So every task you give a council, it means it costs them more, and ultimately that leads to higher rates. And for some councils, the smallest increase in cost can lead to a significant increase in rates. So there's a council down south that had to employ an additional cleaner because of an increase in tourists, and that equated to a 1% increase annually across their ratepayers and their rates. So it doesn't take much. And so that's one point. The second point is that I support the increase in fines for parking in disability parks. I think it is disgraceful behaviour that anyone that doesn't qualify would take the park of someone who has no alternative. Those disability parks are there for a reason. They are because they're usually next to accessible positions and accesses, etc. And I know that there's nothing more frustrating and hurtful when someone's trying to go about their lives and the limited number of parks available to them are taken up for someone that couldn't be bothered trying elsewhere. So I do support the increase in fines.
Yeah, I've had that many times myself where I can't get a park. One of those things. And
And it can ruin your day, can't it, Blake? I mean, ultimately, it can scupper your plans for the whole day if you can't get where you need to
Yeah.
get.
Anything else from you, Paul?
Yeah, so I've got two more questions that have come in from viewers. One's probably going to be a longer answer than the other. Rose wants to know what the outcome and the next steps are for the meeting that you had last week about the toll road through your area.
Oh, very good question. We're all very hot under the collar about this in my patch, and on the Manawatu side as well. So, a very brief outline of the issue is that the Manawatu Gorge, State Highway 3, it was decided in 2017 that it couldn't be saved. The national government at the time fluffed about and tried to look at all sorts of cheap alternatives. Labor came in on a promise that it would build a new highway. That was funded, and that work has been underway ever since, and it's due to be completed in 9 months' time. This is not a new road, it is a replacement for a broken road. The National Party, the national government, have a $6 billion hole in their transport budget because they went round the country, they were dishonest, they promised everybody a new road and they were never going to be able to pay for it. And now the good people of Tararua, Manawatu, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa are going to cop it because the National Party can't balance their books. $4.30 one way. And so many people live on our side of the gorge but work in Palmerston North that are now facing over $40 a week just to get to work or to get to the hospital or to get to school. And the median income in Tararua is $26,000 a year. That is a massive hit. And so we are opposing it very strongly. It's entirely on the government. It's their decision. They instructed NZTA to consult on this, and it will be a cabinet decision. So we had a fantastic public meeting in Woodville last Tuesday, and tonight there is a public meeting in Dannevirke. So Tangiuta Kiri and I will be driving up from Parliament all the way to Dannevirke to attend this meeting, and then turning around and coming straight back because Parliament is on again tomorrow. But it's so important. We absolutely stand with the community on this one, and we'll be fighting it alongside them the whole way.
I see Tauranga has something similar happening to them at the moment as well. And new roads that have been paid for.
Tolls do have a role to play. If a community was offered a brand new road and they were told that, look, in order to get this across the line, we need to do this with a toll, otherwise it's not going to happen. That's a different conversation. This is about a road that is nearly done, that's already paid for. These people have already contributed to this through their taxes, and it's not a new road, it's a replacement road. Whatever way you look at it, it's not right.
Mm-hmm. And last question I've got here from Sally. She'd like to know how you manage to stay so calm when you're dealing with somebody like Simeon Brown, because she feels like throwing something at the TV whenever she sees him.
Yeah, I can appreciate that. But look, I've always sort of taken the view that getting wound up helps no one. And if I was to let this government and its ministers and their dishonesty, the disingenuous approach, and their snarkiness get to me, it wouldn't be the government ministers that make the headline, it would be opposition MP blows his lid. And so I like to think I'm a relatively calm bloke anyway. Sometimes that gets tested, but it's definitely best to just try and not let these things get to you and just keep the focus on the issues.
Perfect. That's all my questions. I'm done.
And I'm done as well. So we'll say thank you for joining, Kieran.
Thank you, Blake. Cheers, Paul. Lovely talking to you, blokes.
The interview with Kieran McAnulty, rushing around all over the place, being an incredibly busy person. You heard the notifications come through on his computer where he kept being reminded he needed to be somewhere else. There's sound now, I promise. There's a 10-second delay between what I say and what you guys hear. It's fixed now, I promise. I promise. There's sound. It's coming. It's coming. Should be working now. Should be. Anyway, Keiran was absolutely right, though, about there being a lot of work to be done in the Tararua regions, and just how much of an effort needs to go into making sure that the government's aware of what they're doing and how much it's hurting people. One of the other things I noticed with that particular interview, when you hear Kieran talk, he does have that kind of blokey farmer sort of accent, but he still nails the Te Reo pronunciation. I think that's absolutely brilliant. I think it's a huge, awesome sign. Don't tell me there's no sound, Sam. I know there's sound. Now, speaking of Sam, from It's in the Ballot, he's got 2 shows coming up this Sunday for the Order Paper. There's a show at 3 and there's a show at 8 o'clock. There's a lot that's gone on in the House this week, including some urgency around the announcement for the Dunedin Hospital, which of course deals with the entire south part of the southern island. Leg point. So let's jump into the news. Give me a second to get this all lined up. Being by myself tonight, it just takes a second or two to get into the right places. But I'll be back in a second with the news. That worked. On Monday, Nicola Willis, seen here being a little teapot short and stout, announced a change in direction for government sector employees that would see changes to work from home rules in an effort to revitalise the Wellington CBD. While work from home has been shown time and again to result in more productive staff, and Aotearoa New Zealand often comes out at the lower end of productivity reports, the government is sure this change will result in more productivity, once again showcasing that research and data are nice to haves, not need to haves in the decision-making process. Citing the pandemic response now being over, which includes the ending of free RATS tests from this Monday, it's not great. Willis completely forgot that work from home actually started in Wellington, being written into contracts and planned for by management in response to the 2016 Kaikoura earthquake. That or she just doesn't care. Both options are really possible. Right. Greenpeace activists this week occupied the office of seabed mining lobbyist Stratera, which drew praise from Green MP Steve Abel. Minister for putting porn on government credit cards, Shane Jones, seen here learning how New Zealand First supporters greeted each other outside Parliament in February of 2022, described the protesters as vermin. The Greenpeace protesters, not the ones who illegally occupied Parliament grounds, harassed locals, called for executions of public figures and burnt the playground down. In response, the ACT Party claimed if a right-wing group did the same, media would demand they resign. Unlike they did when ACT endorsed an alt-right fundraiser held by someone who said they wanted to blow up mosque after mosque, or when David Seymour joked about blowing up the Ministry of Pacific Peoples. On Tuesday, media reported that Tory Whānau and Angela O'Leary had appeared on some podcast. Oh, wait, I know that show. For some reason, Stuff focused their story on the car sale, and while the Herald and News Talk did include elements about discussions around mental health and the pressures of public life, they also mentioned Whānau had discussed breaking the law around Māori wards in a subheading which drove angry racist old white men crazy. Good thing they can all scream woke in the comment sections, or they'd be more frustrated than their wives on their anniversary night. To celebrate Te Wiki o Te Reo Māori this year, Education Minister Erica Stanford held off on announcing a $30 million cut in Te Reo language programs for teachers until the week after it finished. The funding will be used to fast-track resources for the new maths curriculum that is being rushed through without proper training for staff to fully get their heads around the changes, based on erroneous data using a single data set from test results that students weren't studying for or taught for. On Wednesday, ANZ CEO Antonia Watson, seen here with some English literature grad, backed calls for a capital gains tax, saying it was a fair form of income tax. Prime Minister Christopher Luxon tried sarcasm on for size in his response when he said, "I love that the CEO of a big bank in Australia wants to take more money off New Zealanders," making it sound like he thought the bank got the money from the tax, not the government. In completely unconnected news, Prime Minister Christopher Luxon this month sold one of his rental properties for just shy of $1 million, making $295,000 in untaxed capital gains. And reports this week show that for the first time in nearly 3 years, the majority of mortgages approved were for investment properties and not first home buyers. Associate Education Minister David Seymour, seeing here trying to dog whistle, this week announced an end to teacher-only days in schools. While there's a comedy trope of teacher-only days being a chance for teachers to get drunk and laugh at students, these days they're actually used for teachers to get drunk and laugh at Associate Education Minister David Seymour. Seriously, though, they're actually used for planning and upskilling days for staff, so they don't use up their own free time to maintain their professional standards, and they're not included in the number of days young people attend school. Truancy is one of the problems this government has focused on fixing by using their tried and failed method of ignoring advice around the actual drivers of problems, instead of saying all the wrong words to sound like they have a fix. Like in this week's press conference, when Minister David Seymour said, and I quote, "Some students are missing up to 10 days a week in lessons." In New York, Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs Winston Peters, seen here responding to David Seymour's request that he stop saying things like genocide is bad and Palestinian statehood needs to happen, today addressed the United Nations. At one stage, he told other world leaders to stop talking in the middle of his speech and is quoted as saying, "Growing distrust and division is making international cooperation more difficult," which sounds very statesmanlike until you remember which party was under 5% in the polls until they started riding a wave of conspiratorial distrust and division in our own institutions. And finally, meet the spookfish. It's a new type of ghost shark discovered on the ocean floor in the waters around the Chatham Islands. The scientific name Harriet Avia was given to it after the discoverer's grandmother. Ghost sharks live on a diet of crustaceans found on the seabed, accessing them with their long nose-like appendage, and actually have several different identities. They're also known as a chimera, a ratfish, rabbitfish, and elephantfish, which coincidentally are the nicknames I've given to some of the coalition backbench MPs. When asked if the government will look at giving the new shark protected status, Prime Minister Christopher Luxon declined, saying, "We don't do bottom feeding and just focus on the bottom." Oh, and don't forget that daylight saving time starts this weekend. Remember, if you still have an analog clock, to move it forward and to lose an hour's sleep. And if you don't have an analog clock, technology will do it all for you and you'll still lose an hour's sleep, but in a much more efficient way. Random fact for you, daylight saving time was actually instigated by New Zealand entomologist and astronomer George Hudson, so he could have more daylight hours to study bugs, for which he ended up cataloguing thousands of the species, and his collection is now housed in Te Papa. And that is the news. And I tried to finish on something relatively positive. Wrong button. This is why I shouldn't do things by myself. It's a terrible idea. Right, that's it, done and dusted for the week. Next week we have Te Pāti Māori MP Taku Teferis. We're going to have a chat to him. It's going to be absolutely brilliant. And again, don't forget to drop your comments into the sections on the community page on YouTube or into the Facebook page, wherever it is that you're watching this from. Until next time, don't forget, like, share, subscribe, tell everybody what's going on. Thank you, everybody that you know, for joining in. It's been great fun tonight. Hopefully, Blake is feeling much better for next week, so I don't have to sit here and talk to myself at the screen the whole time. So yeah, thanks everybody for joining me. Have a fantastic weekend, and I will catch you guys all next week.